Well, a lot goes into a company's decision to move its headquarters, not the least of which is the security of its buildings and, more importantly, its data. John Boyd Jr., principal of the Boyd Company Incorporated, joins us today with some insight on what's driving a whole new industry.
Thanks
We're talking about data security, what, a $300 billion industry now?
It's a $300 billion industry, projected to grow by 10% in 2013.
Wow, that's quite a bit of growth. What's driving this?
Well, the first thing driving this are federal mandates, like Dodd-Frank, the Healthcare Reform Act, the Patriot Act, HIPAA statutes, and most recently, the Personal Privacy Act, which really affects virtually all parts of our economy. And so every site selection decision happening today, it takes into account data security considerations.
And this is a requirement by the feds for greater security over data?
How companies collect information, store information, and transmit information.
Why is this such a big deal in terms of site selection?
Right. Well, it is because companies are very concerned about two things. Number one, they're concerned about their own information being breached. And of course, there's major penalties and fines associated when there is a data breach.
Is that determined? I mean, how much of that is determined by location? Let's say picking California as opposed to Georgia or Canada.
Right. Well, what we're talking about here are data centers, facilities that keep information safe. And one of the things that we look at for this are communities that fit this profile, that have the skill sets required to hire the right type of workers to keep the information safe, as well as facilities that have insulation from natural disasters, which is the other big criteria. These centers need to operate on a 24/7 basis and can't be affected by things like hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, etc.
Oh, okay, so South Florida is going to be out. Maybe parts of California might be out.
The earthquake zones in California are also not ideal locations for data centers.
Interesting. Is this something you're getting a concern expressed by international firms as well, or is this just domestic?
Well, the data center market is huge globally, but one of the good things about the data center market for our country is that these are primarily jobs that will stay in the U.S. But, in order to comply with federal regulations.
So a foreign company that will come to you and say, well, what's my best choice?
Right.
And you guys will give them advice on...
Well, we developed this profile of what makes markets very, very attractive for the industry. Another thing that, in addition to low land costs and low power costs, is access to green energy. There's a lot of advocacy groups now that are targeting the data center industry because these projects are so energy intensive. Google's data center in Council Bluffs, Iowa, for example, uses the same amount of electricity as 50,000 homes. Wow. Much of that energy is coal-based, and it contributes to global warming. So organizations like Greenpeace now are targeting companies like Google. That's why if you locate to a community like Quincy, Washington, for example, that has low cost but reliable hydroelectric power, that's where Google, Microsoft, and Dell have major data centers. You can kind of offset a lot of the pressure from these advocacy groups. There's a lot of branding potential. And not only is hydroelectric power cheap, it's also reliable. At 2 cents a kilowatt in Quincy, Washington versus 15 cents a kilowatt in Chicago, for example.
Yeah, that's a no-brainer.
Sure.
Right, so you got a lot going into these decisions. That's fascinating stuff, John. We'll have you come back on and talk more about that site selection for companies.
Very good.
Great stuff. Thanks much.
Thank you.